Welcome to my Kaito Cunning Infiltrator Oathbreaker deck tech. This guy is a really exciting new planeswalker coming out of Foundations. He's a really aggressive mono blue Oathbreaker, and that's really uncommon. We really don't have anything else like him. Kaito costs 1 blue and starts at 3 loyalty. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, put a loyalty counter on Kaito. +1, up to 1 target creature you control can't be blocked this turn. Draw a card, then discard a card. -2. Create a 2/1 blue ninja creature token. -9. You get an emblem with, whenever a player casts a spell, you create a 2/1 blue ninja creature token. And that's whenever any player casts a spell, not just you. That static ability is going to make it hopefully easy for us to get to that -9 before too long and really start taking advantage of that. This deck focuses on real low mana value creatures that are hard to block, either unblockable or flying mostly. As you can see here, the mana curve is really low, really focused on 1s and 2s. The idea is instead of having a powerful 4 or 5 mana hard to block creature, we have several low mana creatures to get the maximum value out of the static ability. For signature spell, at first I wanted to do something with Proliferate, and I think that would have been awesome. In fact, there's quite a bit of Proliferate in the deck. But I wound up using Arm with Aether for signature spell instead. A sorcery for 3, until end of turn, creatures you control gain. Whenever this creature deals damage to an opponent, you may return target creature that player controls to its owner's hand. This helps us get maximum value out of those little hard to block creatures, and it also helps protect Kaito, because we're going to be really aggressive on attacking. We don't really have any good blockers, to be honest. We are being really aggressive with this deck, really attack focused, and that's going to leave us vulnerable to being attacked, or more importantly, Kaito being attacked. So this kind of gives us some defense there. And it just seems to fit with what the deck is doing in a really fun, unique way. Alright, let's talk about some of the creatures, the generically good creatures first. Fairy Seer as flying when it enters the battlefield, scry 2. Godal Lurker can't be blocked, and it's got a Megamorph of blue. Hope of Gurapur, I don't know if I'm saying that right. It's got flying and sacrifice it until end of turn. Target player who was dealt combat damage this turn by it can't cast non-creature spells. In a format where everybody's got 2 non-creature spells in the command zone, this could be really good. I mean, it could just be a 1/1 flyer to help with what the deck wants to do, but there are going to be times when if your opponent casts their signature spell on their next turn, you lose the game. So this gives you a little bit of weird defense against that. Mockingbird is one I'm excited about, a new one. Flying, you may have Mockingbird enter as a copy of any creature on the battlefield with mana value less than or equal to the amount of mana spent to cast Mockingbird, except it's a bird in addition to its other types, and it's got flying. This can also just be a 1 mana 1/1 flyer, which is okay in this deck. Slitherblade can't be blocked, nice and basic. Departed Deckhand. When it becomes the target of a spell, sacrifice it. Departed Deckhand can't be blocked except by spirits. Pay 4, another target creature you control can't be blocked this turn except by spirits. Elusive Spellfist. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, it gets +1/+0 until end of turn and can't be blocked this turn. Grey Harbor Merfolk can't be blocked and gets +2/+0 as long as you control a commander that's a creature or a planeswalker. Mercurial Spelldancer. This is one I love. Can't be blocked, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put an oil counter on it. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you may remove 2 oil counters from it. If you do, when you cast your next instant or sorcery spell this turn, copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. And Tetsuko Umezawa Fugitive. Creatures you control with power or toughness 1 or less can't be blocked. So they're just unblockable themselves, but they also turn almost all of your flyers into unblockable creatures. Then we've got some creatures that can draw us cards. Harrier Sphinx has flying, enters the battlefield, tap target permanent, pay 3, draw a card, then discard a card. Mistway Spy is flying in disguise of 2. When it's turned face up until end of turn, whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, investigate. Spectral Sailor is flash and flying, and pay 4, draw a card. This one in the Sphinx, you're probably not going to use that activated ability, but it's there if the game goes long and you need it. Ghostly Pilferer, one of my favorite cards in the format. When it becomes untapped, you may pay 2 if you do draw a card. Whenever an opponent casts a spell from anywhere other than their hand, draw a card. Discard a card, it can't be blocked this turn. If you can get this out early on turn 2, before anyone's cast any planeswalkers, this guy could easily draw you like 4 or 5 cards. Very good. And that's without even paying its 2 mana activation cost thing. Silent Hall Creeper can't be blocked. When it deals combat damage to a player, choose one that hasn't been chosen. Put 2 +1/+1 counters on Silent Hall Creeper, or draw a card, or it becomes a copy of another target creature you control. Enduring Curiosity has flash, and whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. When it dies, if it was a creature, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. It's an enchantment. There's a couple options like this that are just plain enchantments, not creatures, or artifacts for a similar mana cost. Whenever a creature you control deals damage to an opponent, draw a card. I think that in Oathbreaker, you kind of want to avoid these. I'm not saying you can't run them, but this card seems much better. It's much better to have a creature version of that. Sure, it's more vulnerable to removal, but it's also a blocker to protect your planeswalker, and creatures also kind of act as pseudo removal for your opponent's creatures. You know, you can attack our opponent's creatures. So I think this is much better than those options. Deep Analysis is a sorcery that draws us 2 cards. It's got flashback, pay 2 mana and 3 life to, flash it back from your graveyard. I like that this can be used after discarding it to Kaito. That's really why it's in here. Then we've got a couple creatures with Proliferate. Skyship Plunderer is flying, and when it deals combat damage to a player, for each kind of counter on target permanent or player, give that permanent or player another counter of that kind. Thrumming Bird, when it deals damage to a player, Proliferate. Same as Guildpact Informant, whenever it deals combat damage to a player or planeswalker, Proliferate. Next, we've got 2 creatures that pump our other creatures. Grand Architect, other blue creatures you control get +1/+1. Pay 2, target artifact creature becomes blue until end of turn. Tap an untapped blue creature you control, add 2 to your mana pool. Spend this only to cast artifact spells or activate abilities of artifacts. Mostly, though, this is just here for the giving our creatures +1/+1. Paragon of Gathering Mists, other blue creatures you control get +1/+1. You can pay blue and tap it. Another target blue creature you control gains flying until end of turn. Again, here mostly just for the pump. Next, we've got removal cards, and I'm using that term pretty loosely. These are not necessarily the best at removal, but they can at least slow our opponents down. Snaremaster Sprite has flying. When it enters the battlefield, you may pay 2. When you do, tap target creature an opponent controls and put a stun counter on it. Azure Beastbinder has Vigilance and can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. When it attacks, up to 1 target artifact, creature, or a planeswalker an opponent controls loses all abilities until your next turn. If it's a creature, it also has base power and toughness 2/2 until your next turn. Exit Specialist can't be blocked by creatures with power 3 or greater. It disguises for 2. When it's turned face up, return another target creature to its owner's hand. Serum Snare, return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. If that permanent had mana value 3 or less, Proliferate. Another way to get our planeswalker up higher. Brazen Borrower has an adventure that says, return target non-land permanent an opponent controls to his owner's hand, and it's a pretty good little 3/1 flyer. Cephalid Constable, especially good if you got a Lord out. When it deals combat damage to a player, return up to X target permanents that player controls to their owner's hand, where X is the amount of damage dealt to that player. Mesmerizing Doze, enchant creature. When it enters the battlefield, tap enchanted creature, then Proliferate. Enchanted creature doesn't untap during its controller's untap step. And Aetherize, return all attacking creatures to their owner's hand. Next, we've got 2 oddball cards I'm pretty excited about. Strixhaven Stadium is a mana rock that taps for colorless. Put a point counter on it. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to you, remove a point counter from it. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to an opponent, put a point counter on it. Then if it had 10 or more point counters on it, remove all of them, and that player loses the game. This is especially nice as you can proliferate these up. We have, 5 proliferate spells in the deck, so we can get extra point counters that way too. And Teferi's Talent, an enchant planeswalker card. That's kind of weird. Enchanted planeswalker has -12. You get an emblem with, you may activate loyalty abilities of planeswalkers you control on any player's turn, anytime you could cast an instant. And whenever you draw a card, put a loyalty counter on enchanted planeswalker. I love the idea of trying to get to the -12 with this, but that second half is pretty good too. Remember, Kaito pluses to draw cards, so every time he pluses, he's going to be getting an extra loyalty counter. For lands, we've got Castle Ventress for some scry action. Daneth Ruins has pay 2, tap, put 2 +1/+1 counters on target non-human creature that entered the battlefield this turn. In Hall of Oracles, it has tap, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, activate only as a sorcery and only if you've cast an instant or sorcery this turn. This is just a way to make our little hard to block creatures get in more damage. Then we've got 4 counter spells. I made sure to make them very low mana cost, so we have enough mana to cast a creature and a counter spell on their turn. You might have noticed I don't have any mana ramp aside from the stadium. I really think the deck's curve is so low we won't need it. I'm going to quick show a couple of the hard cuts I had to make near the end. Higuru, the Still Wind, seemed pretty good. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you may search your library for a ninja card, reveal it, put it into your hand, and you can pay 2 to make target ninja unblockable. That works with that minus that gives you a 2/1 and the -9. However, I didn't want to put ninjas in the deck just for that. This would be a good target for Kaito's plus ability, though, to make him unblockable. Data I had to cut for cost reasons. It has Island Walk, and when it deals combat damage to a player, search that player's library for an artifact card, exile it, they shuffle until end of turn. You may play that card. A nice way to get some card advantage there, especially if you have an opponent with Island. Karn's Bastion almost made the cut, but I didn't want too many colorless lands. Sink into Stupor is an awesome card. It's a land that can come into play untapped on one side, or this bounce spell on the other side. It's $8 though. It's an $8 uncommon, so I had to cut it, as this is a pretty budget deck. Orf Infiltrator might make its way back into the deck. It's got Skulk, and when it deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. Whenever you discard a creature card, you may pay 2. If you do, create a 3/2 colorless Eldrazi horror creature token. Not only can you use that off the draw and discard ability that's on him, but you can use it on Kaito's ability too. If you liked the video, like the video. That helps out my channel a whole bunch. Oathbreaker is not really very popular, so my channel is also not really very popular. And the likes really go a long way in helping to push the channel and the format. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you next time.